Hey everyone, and welcome to The Black Door. If you're a fan of spine-chilling true stories that will keep you up at night, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a terrifying tale. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let's dive into today's horror stories. I relocated to a different city around 2 years ago for a job opportunity. The move allowed me to snag a cozy home in a decent neighborhood not far from the downtown buzz. I was single at the time, but I figured it was a good spot to eventually settle down if the chance came. The house was 2 floors, had 3 bedrooms, and an open layout downstairs, combining the living room, dining area, and kitchen. It gave off a welcoming vibe. The backyard was also surprisingly spacious, much bigger than anything I'd rented before. This was my first house, a huge milestone for me. Since I didn't have anyone with me, I asked my older sister to help with the move. I rented a small truck, and she took over driving since she's got way more patience on the road than I do. I didn't have much to bring, just the essentials from my old apartment, so the house felt pretty empty when we arrived. We unloaded everything in record time, and she left shortly after. I spent the rest of the day arranging furniture and setting up basic stuff. Later, the internet installer came by, and once my Wi-Fi was up, I spent hours scrolling through YouTube videos before heading to bed. Sleeping in a new place has always been tough for me, so I wasn't surprised that I couldn't fall asleep that first night. My bedroom was at the front of the house, facing the street. A street lamp outside cast a dim light into the room, which was annoying. I made a mental note to buy heavier curtains. While I was lying there, something shifted in the light. A shadow moved across my window. Curious? I got up to check outside. A man was walking slowly along the sidewalk in front of my house. He seemed to be looking in my direction, but I couldn't tell if he noticed me. He looked like an ordinary guy, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s. He wore a navy jacket, jeans, and glasses with thick frames. It struck me as odd because it was nearly 3 a.m., and the area didn't have much happening at night. Most places around here closed early, and the streets were usually quiet. Then again, I was new to this neighborhood and didn't know all its quirks yet. Maybe he was just someone who liked late-night walks, or at least that's what I tried to convince myself. I kept an eye on him for a bit since I wasn't going to fall asleep anytime soon. After a few minutes, the man crossed the street and disappeared into one of the houses. I felt a wave of relief, just a neighbor, probably restless like me. It wasn't that strange, or at least that's what I told myself to shake off the unease. Over the next week, I got to know most of the people on my street, but I didn't run into the guy from that night. From what I gathered, he didn't socialize much, which seemed to be his thing. Once, I spotted him sitting on his porch and figured I'd say hi. As I approached, he didn't even glance my way, let alone respond. He just sat there, staring at something in the distance. I tried not to take it personally. Some folks are just private, but something about him rubbed me the wrong way. The following week, I went out with some co-workers after work. We grabbed dinner at a local diner, and I didn't get home until later than usual. Pulling into my driveway, I saw him again, perched on his porch. This time, he was looking straight at my house. It was unnerving, but I ignored it, heading inside. The moment I stepped in, something felt off. The air in the house didn't feel right, like it wasn't just mine anymore. At first, it was just a gut feeling. I wandered through the house, trying to figure out what was nagging at me. Then I noticed something faint: footprints on the hardwood floors. They weren't mine. I never wear shoes inside, and these were clearly from boots or sneakers. My stomach dropped. Someone had been in my house. I decided right then that I'd install security cameras the next day. It wasn't just about peace of mind anymore. I needed proof if this happened again. That night I double-checked every door and window in the house, making sure they were locked tight. Around 11 p.m., I decided to shower, hoping it would help me relax. When I got out and went to my bedroom, I glanced out the window. There he was again, me neighbor. This time, He wasn't on his porch. He was sitting in his window, staring directly at my house. My heart raced as I quickly pulled the curtains shut, hoping he hadn't noticed me watching. Even after I closed the curtains, I couldn't calm down. Sleep didn't come, and by 3 a.m., I was still wide awake. The faint light from the street lamp outside seeped through the edges of my new blackout curtains. It wasn't enough to brighten the room, but it was enough to keep me on edge. Just like before, a shadow moved through the light outside. My stomach sank as I leaned toward the window, pulling the curtain aside just a bit. My neighbor was walking toward my house. Step by step, he got closer until he vanished from my view entirely. My pulse quickened when I heard the faint creak of the porch steps beneath his feet. My mind raced. I didn't know whether to hide or confront him. After a few moments of frozen indecision, curiosity won out, and I crept quietly downstairs. Halfway down, a new sound reached my ears, the faint, deliberate scrape of metal on the front door. My heart pounded as the realization hit Mehe was trying to get inside. Shaking, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, barely managing to explain the situation to the operator. They assured me officers were on the way, but it felt like hours instead of minutes. I moved cautiously down the stairs, phone clutched tightly in one hand. The moment my foot touched the bottom step, the front door swung open. I froze, peeking around the corner just in time to see my neighbor step inside. His face was unreadable, almost casual, as if he wasn't doing anything wrong. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity. He didn't speak or move. He just stood there like he'd done this 1,000 times before. I, on the other hand, could barely breathe. My hands were trembling so hard I thought I might drop the phone. Without thinking, I turned and bolted back upstairs, slamming my bedroom door shut behind me. I updated the operator, my voice breaking as I told them he was inside. They reassured me again that help was close, but it felt impossible to calm down. The sound of approaching sirens finally reached my ears. I peeked out my bedroom window and saw flashing lights illuminating the street. Relief flooded through me. As officers arrived, weapons drawn, the man had moved back to the porch by then, standing there as if nothing unusual had happened, even with my front door wide open behind him. The police quickly restrained him and searched his pockets, pulling out a set of lockpicking tools. Apparently, they're disturbingly easy to buy and learn how to use. I had no idea how vulnerable my house was until that night. They led him away in cuffs, but I couldn't stop shaking. It wasn't until later that I learned he had been living in his mother's house across the street after serving a short sentence. He wasn't allowed back there. To this day, I don't know if that was his first break-in, or if he'd slipped inside while I was asleep before I moved out within a year. But that feeling of vulnerability still lingers, like an itch I can't scratch. About 8 years ago, my family and I moved into a new place. At the time, my son Evan was barely a toddler, just under 2, and my wife Megan had recently gone back to her job. Before this, we had been crammed into a small apartment, so getting a house with more room felt like a big upgrade. With Megan working again, our finances were finally stable enough to take this step. We were also planning to have another kid, which made the extra space even more important. The house itself was a cozy 2-story with 4 bedrooms, sitting at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. A small creek ran nearby, adding to the charm. Next door lived an older couple, Greg and Laura, who seemed friendly and welcoming. They were in their late 50s, had been living there for over 2 decades, and knew everyone in the area. Shortly after moving in, they invited us over for dinner and helped us meet the neighbors. At first, they seemed like the perfect example of good, kind-hearted folks. About a month in, we went to their house for dinner for the second time. That evening felt off. Laura, who was usually chatty and full of life, barely spoke. She sat at the far end of the table, gripping her wine glass like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Greg tried to lighten the mood, but when he reached out to touch her shoulder, she shrugged him off instantly. It was awkward, but we didn't feel like we should pry. People have their issues, and we were still too new to the neighborhood to get involved. When we got home, Megan brought it up, saying she felt something strange was going on. I admitted I'd noticed it too, but we decided not to overthink it. Over the next few weeks, we saw Greg and Laura around, But Laura's behavior didn't change. She still seemed distant and tense. Then, one evening, I pulled into our driveway and spotted Megan talking to Greg out front. I didn't think much of it at the time. They were just chatting. But later that night, Megan told me Greg had crossed a line. He'd been making inappropriate comments, hinting at things no decent neighbor would say. I was stunned. Sure, I didn't know Greg well, but he always came off as polite. It threw me for a loop, but in a way, it added up. People aren't always what they seem. Megan and I agreed to steer clear of him for a while. She said it wasn't something to report to the police, so we left it at that. Greg, on the other hand, acted like nothing happened. He even invited me over for dinner a few times after that. I kept my distance, giving him short responses and avoiding eye contact. Over time, he seemed to back off, but something about him still felt wrong. I was relieved that Greg seemed to be backing off, but the whole thing left me uneasy. Like we'd made an enemy without knowing the full stakes. It was unsettling because we had no idea what he was capable of. One night, after we'd put Evan to bed, Megan and I were in the living room, catching up on a show. It was around 10 p.m., and the house was mostly dark. Out of nowhere, the motion sensor light on the side of the house switched on. That side wasn't near the road or any foot traffic, so it immediately got our attention. I peeked out the window and saw Greg casually walking back toward his house. The layout of our properties didn't give him any reason to be that close to ours. Even though there was no fence, he had to come about 20 feet onto our property to trip the sensor. Megan and I exchanged uneasy glances. We both knew something was off, even if we couldn't prove it yet. Another time, I was out on the back porch having a cigarette. I don't smoke anymore, but back then, I would sneak one every now and then, never inside the house. I had left the porch lights on and went back in when I was done. Megan was making something in the kitchen, and we ended up in the living room together after that. Maybe 10 minutes passed before I noticed movement near the window. The outdoor lights were still on, which felt strange since they should have turned off by then. I didn't react right away because I didn't want to spook whoever it was, especially if it was Greg. Instead, I stood and stretched like it was nothing, then casually walked into the kitchen. Once I was out of sight, I bolted out the back door and ran toward the window. Sure enough, Greg was standing there. He didn't even flinch when he saw me. The creepiest part was that he had his phone out, holding it up as if he was snapping pictures through the glass. I lost it. I yelled at him to get away, calling him every name I could think of. He didn't argue, didn't explain himself, just walked off like nothing had happened. Megan called the police, but when they showed up, they only gave him a warning. No charges, no follow-up, just a slap on the wrist. We kept seeing him around after that, but never caught him in the act again. The worst part was the constant tension, the feeling of never knowing what he might do next. With Evan being so young, we couldn't take any chances. It wasn't an easy decision, but we knew we couldn't stay in that neighborhood. It hurt to let go of the house, especially after everything we'd put into it. We had imagined raising Evan there, watching him grow up in a safe, quiet place. Within a few months, we managed to sell the house. The buyers were aware of the situation, but they were willing to take the risk. Even now, I can't help but think about Laura. Megan and I both believe she knew what Greg was doing. She always looked so miserable, like she was haunted by his actions, but couldn't or wouldn't do anything about it. I wonder if she's still stuck there and if Greg ever got worse. I just hope the new owners are careful. They'll need to be. This took place in my previous apartment, where I stayed for around 5 years. I've been out of there for some time now, but my memories of that place are forever tied to the trouble I had with some of the tenants below me. That's what this is about. The building had an old-school charm to it, the kind you'd imagine in postcards. It was at least a century old, with weathered red brick walls that had clearly stood through decades of storms. My apartment was cozy but had quirks. The entire top floor was mine, but the slanted ceilings from the roof's pitch made some spaces feel cramped. Still, there were perks, most notably the balcony, which gave a stunning view of the city lights at night. Below me lived 3 guys, all college students barely out of their teens. I was older, in my late 20s by then, and wasn't really into the party scene anymore. They, however, seemed to be all about it. Loud music and laughter echoed through the building a few nights every week. The worst of them was a guy I'll call Josh. From the first time we met, his smug attitude rubbed me the wrong way. I tried to keep things civil. One afternoon, I introduced myself, extending a cautious olive branch. Josh shook my hand with a weird mix of friendliness and superiority, gripping just hard enough to make it uncomfortable. After that, their parties only got rowdier. I stayed quiet about it at first, but what crossed the line was their use of my balcony. Since it was part of my unit, it really bothered me when they started climbing up the fire escape to hang out there. It wasn't theirs to use, but they treated it like their own private hangout spot. One Thursday night, I hit my breaking point. Around 2 a.m., they weren't just playing loud music. They were shouting at the top of their lungs. I could hear them through the thin walls, and when I peeked outside, there they were, laughing and drinking on my balcony. Not once had they asked if they could use it. They just acted like it was theirs. Fed up, I stepped outside to confront them. I tried starting politely, but they were drunk and dismissive. Josh, of course, was the first to pipe up. He squared his shoulders and said, "We've got just as much right to this balcony as you do." His tone was so arrogant it left me speechless. I wasn't about to argue with 3 wasted college kids, so I turned and went back inside, locking the door behind me. As I walked away, I heard Josh yell something like, "Yeah, walk away." Man, it took everything in me not to go back out there. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I stared at the ceiling until at least 3:30 a.m., my mind racing. The next evening, I got home from work and decided I'd had enough. I grabbed my phone and called the landlord, hoping he'd be willing to step in. The landlord brushed me off, telling me to sort it out on my own. It was frustrating, and I felt stuck. To get away from the constant noise and tension, I started spending a few nights each week at my girlfriend's place. It helped, but the issue wasn't going away. One Saturday night, after grabbing drinks with some friends, I walked back to the apartment. I wasn't drunk, just a bit buzzed from a few beers. As I approached the house, I spotted them 3 figures on the balcony again. I sighed, knowing what was coming. Inside, their racket was even worse than I expected. The music blasted, and they were shouting over it, their voices echoing through the small space. I tried to ignore it for a few minutes, sitting in my dimly lit living room, but the anger bubbled up fast. This time, I wasn't going to hold back. I yanked the curtains aside and stared at them. They glanced in my direction but didn't even bother turning the music down. Fuming, I stormed onto the balcony. Josh was the first to notice me. I shouted at them to get the hell off my property. My voice cut through the noise like a knife, and for a moment they froze. But then Josh stood up, meeting me face to face. His cocky smirk was gone, replaced with anger. We started yelling at each other, chest to chest. The tension was boiling over, and before I could process it, Josh shoved me hard. My back slammed into the doorframe, my head was spinning, but instinct took over, and I shoved him right back. He staggered, tripping over his feet, and then it happened. Josh hit the balcony, railing a black iron bar that wasn't nearly as sturdy as it looked. He teetered for a moment before tumbling backward over the edge. My stomach dropped as I watched him fall from the 2nd floor. It wasn't the kind of drop you walk away from without a scratch. The yard below was grass, but that didn't make it safe. His friends rushed to the edge, shouting his name. For a moment, I couldn't move. My legs felt like jelly. When they climbed down to check on him, I followed at a distance, heart pounding. To my relief, Josh groaned and moved slightly. He was hurt, but alive. Whether or not he needed a hospital, I couldn't say, and I wasn't about to ask. They carried him back inside, leaving me standing there in the cool night air. They didn't call the cops, which surprised me, but the incident hung over me like a storm cloud. I knew they could use it against me whenever they wanted. Sure, Josh shoved me first, but with 2 witnesses, they could spin the story however they liked. Living there after that wasn't an option. I didn't feel safe knowing those 3 were right below me, probably plotting their next move. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for them to press charges or try something worse. Within a week, I handed in my notice and started packing. Until my move-out date, I stayed almost every night at my girlfriend's place. The thought of being alone in that apartment made my skin crawl. I wasn't proud of what happened, but I couldn't help feeling they had pushed me to my breaking point. It was an accident, but one I'll never forget. This all began during my second year in college. Before getting into the creepy part, let me set the stage with some background. We used to live next to a guy who worked for some private agency that handled government contracts. According to the neighborhood gossip, he'd found himself a bride from Haiti through some sketchy online service. He brought her to the US, married her, and even paid for her schooling. One day, though, everything flipped. He got dragged out of the house by the cops. That part wasn't even the weirdest thing. It was just the start. Word eventually got around that he'd been arrested and later sent to federal prison on child pornography charges. Here's the thing. The evidence was only found on his home computer, which was connected to the same network as his work setup. Both were on a government-controlled system. If he'd been downloading anything illegal, you'd think the authorities would have caught it instantly. And here's the kicker. The files were downloaded while he wasn't even home. The only person there at those times was his wife. After he was locked up, the wife wasted no time moving her boyfriend into the house. He was also from Haiti, and honestly kind of unsettling. The guy had this habit of sitting in the garage completely naked with the door wide open. I didn't feel safe living next to them, especially with his bizarre behavior. The strangest night came when I was lying in bed, trying to relax under my blankets while watching anime. Suddenly, shouting erupted from outside, and the neighbor's floodlights switched on. I peeled myself away from the warmth of my bed, pulled back the blinds, and peeked out the window. There they were, the wife and her boyfriend arguing loudly on the side of the house. I just let the blinds fall shut and crawled back into bed, hoping to forget about the whole thing. The yelling didn't stop that night. They went at it again and again, their shouts cutting through the quiet every hour or so. Naturally, I couldn't help myself. I kept peeking out the window. Every time, though, it was just another shouting match, nothing more. Then, a little after 2 a.m., I heard this frantic banging on our front door. I froze for a second, unsure if I should move. The pounding was loud enough to shake the door, and it woke up my dad, who sleeps on the opposite side of the house. I quickly turned off the television and slipped out of bed as quietly as I could. In the darkness, I heard the distinct sound of a gun cocking, followed by my dad whispering, "Stay put." He crept toward the door, cautiously peeking through the peephole. But before he could even open it, the banging shifted to our neighbor's door. By then, it was clear what was happening. The woman was running house to house, pounding on doors and yelling for help. Her screams were chilling. "He's going to kill me!" And the worst part, she was covered in blood. Every neighbor on our street must have been awake at that point, lights flickering on in windows up and down the block. I'm pretty sure everyone called the cops. They showed up about 15 minutes later, blue and red lights flashing through the night. The officers moved door to door, taking statements. When they got to ours, they seemed especially interested in my room, since it was closest to the house next door. They wanted to know if I'd noticed anything unusual. I told them everything, the arguing outside, the floodlights going off multiple times. Then one of them asked if I'd seen a red car. I told him no, there was no red car. He kept pressing, asking if I was sure, trying to nudge me into saying I'd seen one, but I was adamant. I was awake the whole time, and if any car had pulled into their driveway, the motion lights would have gone off. I added that the lights were so sensitive they woke me up every time they turned on, even when I was asleep. By morning, the street was quieter, but that eerie feeling hadn't lifted. When I stepped outside, there was something new, a blood-soaked couch sitting by their curb. I couldn't bring myself to look at it for long. To this day, I have no clue what actually went down that night, and honestly, I don't think I want to. Let me tell you something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. I'm 35 now, a tall guy standing at about 6 feet 2 and weighing around 190 pounds. Life's been rough lately. I just went through a brutal divorce. My ex packed up and left, so I decided to put our house on the market and start fresh in a new place. A few months ago, I was attacked, left with a concussion and over 40 stitches. Even now, I don't feel completely safe. I never changed my address officially, just to be careful. All my mail goes to a P.O. box, just another layer of security I didn't think I'd ever need. One evening, I was sprawled on my couch, flipping through television channels with a baseball game playing in the background. It was just after 8 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my friends usually gave me a heads up before stopping by. The doorbell rang once. I ignored it. A few minutes later, it rang again. This time, I got up, careful not to make any noise as I crept toward the door. I peered through the peephole and saw a young woman standing there, probably mid-20s, small frame. She looked harmless enough, but I had no clue who she was. Something about it felt off. Keeping the chain on, I cracked the door open just a bit. She smiled warmly, saying my name like we were old friends. In one hand, she held a pie, in the other, an envelope. "Hi, I'm Melissa. I just moved into C2 down the hall," she chirped. My eyes flicked toward the apartment she mentioned. The last I checked, an older guy lived there. I hesitated, then slowly undid the chain, taking the pie from her. I asked, "How do you know my name?" Her grin widened. "Oh, your mail got mixed up in mine," she said, waving the letter. I took it, my stomach twisting as I saw my name and my new address staring back at me. I was careful about who had that information. I didn't remember seeing her around before, and I definitely never saw anyone moving into C2. She giggled, brushing off my concern. "I guess I'm just lucky," she said, sticking out her hand. I shook it, but something about the way she squeezed my fingers made my skin crawl. Her smile stayed frozen in place, but her tone dropped to a near whisper. "Nice to meet you, neighbor." Then, instead of heading towards C2, she turned and walked straight toward the elevator. The second the door shut, I tossed the pie onto the counter and ripped open the envelope. No sender, no return address, just my name and my new address typed out in the center. Nothing else. No message, no explanation. My whole body tensed. Was I being paranoid, or was something seriously wrong? About 4 years ago, I moved into a small rental with my ex-boyfriend, thinking we had picked a quiet and safe neighborhood. One of our neighbors, Lisa, worked in the rental office, and her husband, Mike, had just gotten out of prison. He spent his days doing maintenance work around the property's trimming bushes, fixing fences, mowing lawns. Most of the time, though, he just sat outside tinkering with his tools or an old truck. At first, Lisa and Mike seemed like good, laid-back people. We even smoked weed together a few times, mostly with Mike since Lisa wasn't into it. I felt like I could trust them, and for a while, I did. Then things started to feel off. One day, I casually told Mike that I sometimes heard strange noises in the attic above my room, footsteps, furniture scraping against the floor. It always made me uneasy, and I would call someone just to feel less alone until the sounds stopped. Mike smirked and joked, "What if someone's watching you?" I laughed it off, but something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. After my breakup a few months later, Mike started messaging me, asking if I wanted to drink with him while Lisa was at work. I always made up an excuse not to. Then, one day, his messages got worse. He straight up asked if I wanted to sleep with him, saying he was sure Lisa was cheating on him. I immediately shut him down, telling him that was never going to happen. But from that moment on, everything between us felt wrong. I didn't tell Lisa because I didn't want to cause drama or risk getting kicked out. I also hated confrontation, so I just kept quiet. Not long after that, the noises from the attic became more frequent. At first, it was just the occasional thud or faint creak, but soon, it sounded like someone was actually moving up there. Then, one night around 3 or 4 a.m., I heard a loud bang right outside my bedroom door. My heart nearly stopped. When I finally worked up the nerve to check, I found a small metal tool on the ground, something that looked a lot like a lockpick. I picked it up, took a picture, and sent it to Lisa, thinking maybe someone had been trying to break in. She brushed it off, saying it was Mike's ice pick, not a lockpick, and that no one could get through my deadbolt with it anyway. But I wasn't stupid. I knew exactly what a lockpick looked like. From that night on, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The attic in our duplex was shared, meaning that if Mike really wanted to, he could get into my side from his. That thought alone made my skin crawl. Then, a few days later, I noticed something even worse, a small hole drilled into my ceiling right above my bed. My stomach dropped. I crumpled up a piece of paper and shoved it in there, pretending like it wasn't happening. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe this was all in my head. But deep down, I knew better. Still, I didn't go to the police. What could I even say? Hey, my creepy neighbor might be spying on me from the attic, but I have no real proof. I had some evidence photos of the lockpick and the scratches on my door, but every time I checked the attic, it was empty. I never dared go up alone since the entrance was in my garage and needed 2 people to reach. By the time my ex came over to help check, the noises had always stopped. I felt trapped, unsure of what to do. In the end, I started staying at my new boyfriend's place as much as possible, planning to move out soon. My neighbors weren't happy about my sudden decision to leave, but I didn't care. I stopped hanging around them entirely, only acknowledging them in passing if we happened to be outside at the same time.